Welcome to the world of Utopia, 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 Utopia. Utopia, the perfect society, where the balance here is the needs of society versus the desires of the individual, and yet somehow Utopia makes it all work. The society works, is functioning, and everything's moving forward like clockwork, and yet the individuals are all happy. Nobody's frustrated. Nobody's angry at the system. Do you think that can really work in reality? I mean, we're sort of heading into a utopia right now, except right now our government has said that the needs of the society outweigh the desires of the individual. Like this slide that you're seeing in front of you, that we're right in the middle of COVID-19, the coronavirus, and yet this pastor says, come to church. 1,000 people went to church that Sunday in defiance of the government's stay at home and stop spreading the disease. What's more important, the wants of the individual or the needs of the society? That's what utopia has to weigh. Utopia, by definition, is a community or society possessing highly desirable or perfect qualities. Of course, what's highly desirable or perfect is subject to interpretation depending on to whom you're speaking. But in general, a utopia means that everybody's happy. Your basic needs are all met. Everybody is fed and clothed. They have great shelter. They have entertainment. Life is enjoyable. A dystopia is considered to be the opposite of a utopia. Here, in a dystopia, we are dehumanized. There are tyrannical governments. There's environmental disaster. There's all sorts of things that are cataclysmic and are causing society to actually sort of go the wrong way. People are unhappy and they're frustrated, but the government says this is the way it's going to be and you do it or die. We've seen lots of dystopias throughout history. We've never really seen a true utopia. The word utopia was created by Sir Thomas More in England in 1516 for a book where he described his idea of an ideal society. Now, 1516, we're looking at the Tudors as the kings and queens of England. This is, I think Henry VIII is still king. It's just before Elizabeth will take over. So anyway, he was looking at, there was a lot of upheaval in England at this time. And so he decided to say, well, while we're reshaping England and the way England's going to work, what would be the perfect society? So he went back and looked at the Greek language and he created the word utopia from Greek. But we're not sure what he really intended, because in Greek the term topos means place. But Greek language doesn't have a prefix, just the letter U. He may have been using the syllable OU, which means no, or was working with EU, which means good. Either way, utopia could mean no place or good place. So he was either saying that there is no such thing as a perfect society, or he was trying to describe what he thought would be the perfect society. We're not sure if he was being sarcastic or optimistic. Some critics believe that More's intention was satirical and that both meanings actually applied, thus implying that the perfectly good place is really no place. His book Utopia described the island nation of Utopia, located in the Atlantic Ocean, where the perfect government has finally been established. In many ways, it resembles socialism or communes as were established in the 1960s and 70s in America. You know, those camps of hippies who tried to live apart from the government, and they grew their own food and everybody took care of each other. Notice they didn't last. The people of Utopia have no personal freedom or privacy. Their living space is assigned to them and is shared by 10 to 16 adults per household. Their clothing is provided by the government and all meals are served in community cafeterias. Jobs are assigned to everyone, so there is no unemployment. No one has any personal belongings and all goods are stored in warehouses for communal use as needed. Marriage still exists, but husbands and wives are equal under the law. All citizens are encouraged to work for the betterment of Utopia. Criminals are punished by banishment or by serving as slaves. Various faiths and religions exist and are encouraged, with only atheism forbidden. In many ways, this sounds like communism, but yet when you get to the end with religion, it kind of works the opposite of communism. Some critics believe that the book Utopia is a satire of governments of the time, and especially a poke at 16th century English society. Others have stated that Moore was serious in his intentions on how to create a perfectly functioning society. Whatever his original intention, Utopia has inspired a genre of literary fiction that continues to fascinate and inspire writers and readers today, with utopian themes expanding into ecological, economic, political, religious, technological, feminist, and racial concepts. So he really got something rolling here. The idea of the perfect government is not new. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks with Plato. But the way that Moore addressed it really sparked people's imagination. Many people believe that Moore's Utopia influenced politics. For example, the American and French revolutions were both attempts at eliminating royalty and creating social equality. In 1848, Karl Marx published his pamphlet, The Communist Manifesto, and later the three-volume Das Kapital, calling for the elimination of social classes and the elevation of the working class. Basically, true equality. Everybody has what they need. There are no poor, there are no rich, and the society just basically continues to move forward because people want it to. In the early 20th century, partly influenced by the Industrial Revolution and immigration, the concept of a utopian society grew in popularity and became a recurring theme in literature. You have to stop and think. All these immigrants were coming to America. Why? To escape a harsher society that they were living in, where they were oppressed and unable to improve their lives, and they saw in America this golden possibility. Many of them actually believed that our streets were paved with gold, that you could come to America and become rich. In America, you could own land. You could build your own future. Nobody was going to tell you what to do. Of course, this also resulted in homelessness and great poverty. Also, the Industrial Revolution, these changes in technology were making different things possible, things that could never have been done before. Social status and wealth no longer depended on the ownership of land. This is how, especially in Europe, they maintained control. The royalty owned all the land. This is where we get the term landlords. In England, Ireland, France, Spain, you couldn't own land. The royalty owned it, so you were allowed to farm on that land, and then you paid a portion of your profits. You paid a portion of your crops that you grew back to the lords. And this went all the way back up to the king. So you got the king and the lords who really aren't doing a lot of physical labor. They're just basically running around making sure that the peasants are behaving themselves and paying their taxes. The peasants are doing all the work. When you get to America, still, it was important to own land because farming was the way you made a living. Now technology is coming along and we're getting factories, we're getting warehouses, we're changing the lifestyle. People left the farms. In fact, the farms didn't even need the people anymore. They had tractors and all sorts of new technology to, like the seed drill, to take over the role of, the cotton gin, let's not forget the cotton gin, take over the role that people and slaves used to do. Slaves weren't needed anymore. Machinery had taken their place. So where did we need people? In the factories. So people moved from the farms in the country and they went to the factories in the city. And a new way of life arose. Very similar to what Thomas More was describing. So we're looking at this concept that utopia is possible, that we can provide for everyone. Everyone can have a job. They can have a role in life. We can educate everybody. We have the ability to serve everyone in a whole new way. But it just sounds too good to be true. And there were two authors, among many, now there were many, H.G. Wells among them, who explored this concept of utopia. But the two most famous novels that explore the concept of utopia or dystopia are George Orwell's 1984, which was published in 1948, and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which was published in the 1930s. And Huxley looks at a world where it's more of a utopia. The people are very, very happy, but they are still being controlled by the government. They just aren't aware of it anymore. And in George Orwell's 1984, it's the ultimate dystopia where the government has complete control over everyone and there is no freedom. There's a lot of similar themes between the two books, even though their approach is different. Their politics are similar in the sense that the government maintains control over the people. It's just that in 1984, it's an iron fist and laws are strongly enforced, whereas in Brave New World, control is done through bribes. It's let's keep the people happy and distracted so they don't see what the government's really doing. Technology is important in both books because without these improvements in technology, the control would be impossible. Brave New World and 1984 both look at the concept of sex as problematic. It takes away your alliance to the government. So it discourages marriage, it discourages long-term relationships. Instead, children are raised by the government and are educated by the government to serve the government. Culture, there really isn't much culture in 1984. It's all government run. In Brave New World, lots of entertainment, things to keep the people happy, or at least what they think makes them happy, whole time not really understanding what's going on. As I've already discussed, sex, but drugs are used, especially in Brave New World, to keep the people happy and, of course, a little addled so they don't realize what's going on. Education in both cases is strongly controlled so that the people only know what the government wants them to know. In fact, 1984 goes to the point of actually rewriting history. In fact, it'll change a newspaper. If someone has offended the government, they want them to just disappear. They arrest the person, kill them, and then go back and change every reference to them that was ever published and make them literally disappear. There is nothing that proves they ever existed. Their birth certificates are destroyed. They go back into newspapers and eliminate their names from the whole article might be gone, or they just change the name to someone else. They make sure that there's no way anyone can prove that person ever existed. Fear and punishment exist in both books. If you transgress against the government, you will be punished, and it's not pleasant. You get re-educated or terminated. But in both cases, there are rewards. There are things to keep you happy. 1984, not so much. Brave New World, it focuses on that. Huxley saw what was going on in America at the time, and he realized that you have to understand that the education system at the time, prior to the Industrial Revolution, education was not a guarantee for anybody. There were schools, and sometimes they were sponsored by the government, and sometimes they weren't. Education was left up to the individual. If you wanted an education, it could be found. You may have to pay for it, but it was there. Most farmers couldn't read. Literacy was very low in the United States. So what happens is when we get to the Industrial Revolution, well, we need these children who are going to be working in the factories either as adults or as children. There were a lot of children who worked in the factories. They need to be able to obey and follow directions. So education changed from the Greek ideal of let's encourage free thinking and allowing people to come up with great ideas on their own to being good little followers who follow direction. Think about your education system that you just came out of, the high school system. What does it do? You have to arrive at school at a certain time, 7 o'clock in the morning. That's about the same time the factories are getting started. And you show up and they take attendance and make sure that you're there, make sure you're healthy enough to go to work, and then they send you off to your different assignments. And every time the bell rings, you move to a different assignment. And then you get a lunch period and you go back to work at a different assignment, and eventually your workday ends and you're sent home. See, the school system was actually designed to get you ready for work in the factories. They taught you the math you would need to work in the factory. They taught you so that you could read, and taught you what history they wanted you to know, not necessarily the true history. As we're noticing now, if you look back at a textbook from 1933, you would see what a great thing we were doing by taking out the Indians and teaching the Native Americans how to be just like white people, and that black people really needed us to take care of them because they couldn't take care of themselves. It was really a really strange way of looking at history, making white people look superior and like we were God's caregivers to the world. Our history books are still filled with a lot of misinformation, and this bothered Huxley. Here's a quote from him. Children are nowhere taught in any systematic way to distinguish truth from falseness, or meaningful from meaningless. Why is this so? Because their elders, even in the democratic countries, do not want them to be given this kind of education. We really don't want a nation of free thinkers. We want a nation of people who follow the highly educated leaders of this nation so that what they want will happen. And if you actually study American history, unfortunately, that's very true. Orwell was looking at what was going on in England at the time, and a little, to some degree, America as well. And he was very concerned with what was happening. He was writing right at the end of World War II, and he had seen what Hitler had done. And he saw the same thing happening in Russia, that Stalin was just another Hitler. And we weren't doing anything to stop it. Didn't we learn anything from World War II? And he started thinking about how Hitler was able to get away with what he did. And he wrote about this in his book 1984. He believed by the year 1984 that we would have this really frightening world where the governments were in complete control, that it would be just like Nazi Germany. Some of his quotes from that book. Football, beer, and above all gambling filled up the horizon of their minds. To keep them in control was not difficult. So, just like in Brave New World, lots of entertainment, things to distract the people from the truth. Just like in Huxley's mind, rewriting history is important in 1984. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So the people who are in power at the moment rewrite history to make you think the way they want you to think, and thus direct you towards the future they want to see happen. Orwell came up with these concepts that they're contradictions, that some of the slogans that Big Brother, the leader of the governments in 1984, or the government, sorry, just one, things like war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Well, he maintained that the government, by constantly keeping the country at war, actually maintains peace at home. How does that happen? Well, if we're all focused on helping the war effort, we're not going to be fighting among ourselves, are we? Freedom is slavery. Well, how do we earn our freedom? By working. How do we work? For the government. By producing all these things the government needs, we are allotted our moments of freedom. Are we really getting freedom? What are we really working for here? Ignorance is strength. Hey, the government wants you to realize that if you don't understand what's going on, the government is strong. The influence of these two novels can be seen in a wide variety of novels, films, plays, art, and music. For example, World War II trench art by James Wilkinson here. Notice everybody wearing a gas mask, everybody looking exactly the same, everybody doing what the government tells them to do. Are we kind of doing that right now? If you're familiar with rock and roll, Pink Floyd, The Wall, that whole album talks about conformity and about how society wants us to behave. The government in their education system in England was just trying to turn everybody else out to be literally another brick in the wall. Everybody serving to support the wall, to keep the wall standing, the wall being the government. Notice this image. They broke through one wall only to find there's another standing in their way. So one of the songs on this album, I don't need no arms around me. I don't need no drugs to calm me. I have seen the writing on the wall. Don't think I need anything at all. No, don't think I'll need anything at all. No, the government will take care of it. I don't need to think for myself. And it continues. There are so many explorations of what happens when we allow control to slip out of our hands. One of my favorites is William Golding's Lord of the Flies, where he looks at this concept of a bunch of young boys. They're just old enough to have been educated into what it means to follow rules. They have been at a private school and have been following orders and rules of the adults. They're about 14 years old when they are on a plane that crashes in the Atlantic, and they wind up on a tropical island. They're probably down in the Caribbean somewhere, but they wind up on an uninhabited island, and and all the adults that were on the plane are killed, and so they have to try to build their own society, find a way to survive. And we have two characters who try to take control and try to lead things, and unfortunately one says, let's create rules, let's create order, let's try to make a system here so that everybody will do well. And another character says, no, we're just going to let the strong rule. If you're strong enough, you get to make the rules. You get to decide who gets to eat and who has to die. And so towards the end of the book, one of the characters says, we did everything the adults would do. What went wrong? Is it our natural instinct to abuse each other, to create dystopia, to create societies where the strong rule over the weak? The most frightening thing at all when you think about utopia and dystopia is the fact that dystopian societies have been present for a long time, and despite all that we've learned, they're still here today. To some degree, you could argue about Iran and several countries in the Middle East, what's going on in Afghanistan with the terrorists and ISIS and all that mess. Russia is trying to reestablish some level of this. China is still to some degree dystopian, although they've allowed some level of freedom to creep in. But the most perfect example of a dystopian society is North Korea. We'll see a video later that it's so frightening what's going on in that country, to think that that could still happen today. That the people would believe that their leader is really concerned about what's good for them while they're starving. It just horrifies me. What we're going to be doing for the rest of this unit is we're going to be looking carefully at life in America today. Here in America, how close are we to utopia, the perfect society, or are we moving towards dystopia, a society where we're being controlled? And themes again, 1984. Big Brother is watching you. One of the big themes there. Big Brother has cameras everywhere. Televisions in your house are actually watching you. Does that sound familiar? In our world today, there are cameras everywhere. There are 30 million closed caption cameras in America. I just go to the drugstore and it says, "You're on camera here." People have these doorbells now, these little, what do they call them? The little eyeballs, I guess you call them. The security systems, the peepholes in the doorway. They're watching what's going on in their neighborhood. Everywhere you go, you're getting caught on camera. Your cell phones. You see people walking down the street, something goes on, they suddenly start filming you with their cell phones. You have no control over this. People are watching everything you're doing. They're listening to what you're listening to on the computer. They turn on your camera on your computer without your knowledge. They're checking your cell phone to see what you're doing. They are monitoring us. Brave New World. One of the slogans, love is as good as Soma. Soma is the drug that's distributed for free to everybody in the Brave New World. Soma keeps you happy. Soma makes you stop worrying about things. It relieves stress. It makes you comfortable. It also makes you stop questioning and worrying about things that you really should be concerned about. Huh. You think maybe we have a little bit of that going on now? Look at these posters. God made weed. Man made beer. In God we trust. Ooh. Legalize it, regulate it, tax it, grow the economy. Marijuana, it's a good thing. Whew. And then, of course, we stop to think about all the doctors who are just handing out Oxycontin and heroin derivatives right and left, and it'll make you feel better. Whew. How close are we really to these dystopic worlds? So think about that. We're going to start reading some short stories soon. Take care, and I will talk to you soon.